What's going on, everybody? Kalipa's Tech here, coming back at you with another video. This is pros and cons for the Samsung Galaxy A33 5G. In this video, I'm going to be giving you some of my favorite and least favorite things about this phone to help you decide whether or not it's the right one for you. Now, if you want to learn more about this phone, be sure to check out my full review and tips and tricks videos for it on the channel. But with that being said, let's get started. So my first pro for the Samsung Galaxy A33 5G is that it has stereo audio. Now, in case you don't know what that means, basically with this phone, when you're playing some sort of media, whether you're watching a video, playing a game, listening to music, if you're doing anything with sound, it's going to be coming out of both the bottom speaker and the top speaker, and this is going to give you a much more premium, high quality kind of sound. Now, this is especially nice because even in phones in this price range, you don't see this in all of them. There are plenty of phones, even higher end mid-range phones, that only have sound coming out of the bottom speaker, and I feel like this is such a letdown because when you're consuming content, sure, not even flagship phones really have that high quality of speakers, especially when you compare the sound to something like headphones or Bluetooth speakers or something like that. But if you're doing something and you don't really feel like using headphones and you don't have a nicer speaker around you, it's nice to at least get decent sound coming out of your phone itself. So seeing that we actually do get stereo audio here with the Samsung Galaxy A33 5G, if you are consuming content and you don't happen to have a pair of headphones around, then you'll be happy to know that with this phone, you're actually gonna get some pretty good quality audio. My second pro for this phone is the battery. With the Samsung Galaxy A33 5G, we're getting a 5000 mAh battery that supports 25 watt fast charging. So not only are we getting a really large battery here, but we're also getting pretty good fast charging. So if you don't have a whole lot of time to charge up your phone, this fast charging is definitely going to save you quite a bit of time. And compared to other phones in the price range, sure, there are some phones that do have 25 watt fast charging, mostly just other Samsung Galaxy A series phones, but most phones, again, at least in this specific price range, are going to have somewhere between 15 and 18 watt fast charging, which really isn't bad per se, and unless you have the proper fast charger, you're not even going to notice the difference. But if you are after the best fast charging possible, then for a mid-range phone at least, the Samsung Galaxy A33 5G has pretty much the best fast charging you can get. Now, of course, fast charging isn't everything. I mean, what's the point of having good fast charging if you don't have a good battery to begin with? But with the Samsung Galaxy A33 5G, we're getting a really large 5000 mAh battery, so you're going to get tons of battery life throughout the day. So if you have a more mobile lifestyle where you're not always around a charger, having a large battery like this is going to be a great thing because not only are you going to get a bunch of life throughout the day, but depending on how you actually use your phone, you could get multiple days worth of battery life. And of course, another great thing about this is that down the road, as the battery degrades, which all batteries do, you're not going to notice it nearly as quickly with this phone, since with such a large battery, you're already going to be starting out with so much more battery life than you need. So as the phone wears out and the battery capacity starts to get smaller, it's probably still going to be a while before it actually affects you. My third pro for the Samsung Galaxy A33 5G is the processor. With this phone, we're getting 6GB of RAM with the Samsung Exynos 1280 processor. Now keep in mind, there are several different variants of this phone, one that has 4GB, one that has 6GB, which again is this phone, and one that has 8GB. And depending on which carrier you get it through, or if you get it unlocked or the international version, whatever the case may be, it may be different. Now this isn't really going to change a whole lot, but still keep that in mind. Now that being said, I did run a Geekbench 5 benchmark test on this phone, and it came back with a single core score of 740 and a multi-core score of 1874. Now, if you're not familiar with this test, this might not mean a whole lot to you, so I do recommend running a Geekbench 5 benchmark test on your current device and then comparing your score to this to see whether or not this phone would be an upgrade for you, because who knows, you might have a faster device already. But I can tell you, just from having run this test so many times on so many different phones, this is actually a really good score. Compared to other phones in the same price range, the Samsung Galaxy A33 5G is probably one of the fastest, and it can handle pretty much anything you throw at it. I've done all kinds of things with this phone, from more basic stuff like going on social media, streaming videos and music, to stuff like mobile gaming, and all of it runs really smoothly. I've had no performance issues whatsoever. So if you're looking for a phone that can really tackle your daily tasks and give you a really good, smooth experience at the same time, then the Samsung Galaxy A33 5G is a great option. And in addition to just being fast, of course, as the name suggests, this phone is a 5G phone. So if you want that 5G connectivity, that's another great reason to get this phone. My fourth pro for the Samsung Galaxy A33 5G is that it has NFC. Now, in case you don't know what it is, NFC is the technology behind contactless mobile payment services like Google Pay, Samsung Pay, Apple Pay, Amex Pay, all that kind of stuff. And without NFC, you can't use that feature. But luckily, with the Samsung Galaxy A33 5G, we do get NFC. Now, that's not really uncommon per se, especially in phones in this price range. In fact, it's actually the opposite. There are only a few phones in this price range that don't have NFC, but still at the same time, if you are looking for a phone that can use that feature, then just keep in mind that with this phone, you're not going to have any problem with that. My fifth pro for the Samsung Galaxy A33 5G is the display. Now with this phone, we're getting a 6.4-inch 90Hz Super AMOLED display with a resolution of 1080p, a PPI of 411, an aspect ratio of 20:9, and an 83.7% screen to body ratio. So this phone has a really good display in pretty much every way. First of all, the size and dimensions are great. At 6.4 inches, it's not the largest display you can get. There's stuff like the Samsung Galaxy S22 Ultra, any Motorola Moto G stylus phone, the iPhone 13 Pro Max, the list really goes on. Those phones are much larger, but at the same time, with the Samsung Galaxy A33 5G, you are getting the benefits of having a larger display, but at the same time, the phone isn't too bulky or uncomfortable to hold. In addition to this, with the 20:9 aspect ratio, we're getting a taller and more narrow form factor here, and this is going to give you a much more immersive experience if you're doing something like viewing videos in landscape mode, for example, and if you're reading or something like that, you'll be able to fit more content on the screen without having to scroll as much. In addition to the size and dimensions, the quality is also really good. The Super AMOLED display makes it really bright, and it makes the colors a lot more bold and vibrant, and of course, the 1080p resolution makes the image nice and crisp, and if that wasn't enough, the 90Hz refresh rate is going to make the motion a little bit smoother and faster on the screen. So if you're doing something like streaming videos or playing games where there's a lot going on your display, the higher refresh rate is really going to help out with that. And even when you're just navigating through the phone in general, it's going to feel a little bit faster and more premium. So overall, if you're looking for a mid-range phone with a really good display, then the Samsung Galaxy A33 5G is definitely going to be one of the best. But now that we've gone over some of the good things about this phone, let's talk about some of the not so good things. Now, before we go into the cons, I do want to point out this is a little nitpicky, so don't be surprised when I bring up things that are really small details, because after all, for what it is, this is a really all-around good phone. So while these cons I'm about to go over might not be that impactful to the average user, they are still things to keep in mind all the same. So with that being said, my first con for the Samsung Galaxy A33 5G is the materials. Now don't get me wrong, the build quality of this phone in general is really good, and it feels really sturdy and solid. I mean, the buttons feel really strong, it doesn't feel like the phone's gonna fall apart, so that's not really bad. But at the same time, the phone is made of plastic all around, except of course the glass display. And being made of plastic makes the phone feel a little bit cheaper. Now sure, this is a mid-range phone, so I didn't really expect anything like glass, but at the same time, comparing it to other mid-range phones that are a little bit at the top of the mid-range, like for example the iPhone SE, that phone, believe it or not, is pretty much the same price as this phone, maybe a little bit more, but it's not really that much of a difference. And that phone is made of glass and all kinds of premium materials, whereas with this phone, we're just getting plastic, not even any metal or anything like that. So again, don't get me wrong, this phone does have really good build quality and it feels pretty good, but at the same time, definitely don't be expecting anything premium, because again, despite looking pretty good, it's really just plastic. Now my second con for the Samsung Galaxy A33 5G is that there's no wireless charging. Again, not a deal breaker by any means. I feel like half the people watching this video probably wouldn't even use wireless charging if they had it, but at the same time, the reason I always count this as a con is wireless charging really isn't that crazy of a feature. It's not really fancy or even special in any way. I mean, I've seen $100 phones like the Visible Midnight, for example, that not only have wireless charging, but the wireless charging on that phone works really well, and it does have its uses. I mean, if you want good cable management, for example, being able to slap a phone on a wireless charger instead of having to plug it in and get wires everywhere is a nice option to have. And then say your charging port breaks, with a phone like this, sure, maybe you could repair it, but it might be more of a hassle than it's worth. And in that case, without wireless charging, of course, you're basically gonna have to replace the phone. Whereas if you did have wireless charging, if your charging port breaks, then you can still charge your phone and keep it for a little bit longer. So in general, of course, wireless charging isn't really going to change anyone's life, but at the same time, it's a feature that I know Samsung could easily implement in their mid-range phones, and I've definitely seen the feature in enough lower-end phones to know this for a fact, but for whatever reason, they're not putting it in phones like this. Now my third con for this phone, this is probably the most relevant to the most people, but that is that this phone does not have a headphone jack. Now that's something I really don't get, and even though I don't even personally own a pair of wired headphones, I know there are plenty of people out there that still do use that feature and would love to have that option. And seeing that this is a mid-range phone and not something like an S22 Ultra or an iPhone, I don't really get why Samsung took away that feature. There was really no need for it. Sure, there are some changes we've seen in phones over the years that we might not really like a whole lot, but we get used to it because there's reasoning behind it. Like for example, when they first started taking away physical buttons on phones, I know I personally was really skeptical about that at first, and a lot of people really didn't like not having buttons, but we got used to it because after all, that kind of thing does make sense. But I mean, taking away a headphone jack, it doesn't even have to be specifically headphones. What if you have an aux cord or something like that and you just don't feel like using your USB-C connection? There's so many benefits of having a headphone jack and really not that many drawbacks. And seeing that pretty much every other phone that's not a Samsung phone in this price range does have a headphone jack, it's pretty disappointing that the A33 5G with all its nice features doesn't have such a simple thing. Now my fourth con for the Samsung Galaxy A33 5G, this is more of a stylistic one, is the water drop notch on the front facing camera. Now I'm really not a fan of water drop notches, and this is one of the only phones, if not the only phone in this specific price range that does have this design, and I feel like it's a little bit outdated. I like the hole punch design a lot better. It looks much cleaner and more modern. In the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G, for example, does have a water drop notch camera, so I personally think it would be a lot better if Samsung just did away with the water drop notch for good. But that being said, at least this camera does work really well at 16 megapixels. Maybe it's not the most powerful camera out there, but it definitely does get the job done. So aesthetics aside, it is still a really good camera. Now my fifth con for the Samsung Galaxy A33 5G is that when you're shooting 4K videos, you're limited to 30 frames per second. Now this is a little bit of a niche type of concern, but in my opinion, I feel like if you're gonna be able to shoot 4K videos, they might as well have given us the option to shoot in 60 frames per second, because I feel like typically the type of person who's gonna be shooting a 4K video on a smartphone might be planning on actually doing something with it. And if you're recording a video with a lot of motion in it, maybe you want to do something like a slow motion video or something, then being able to record on a higher frame rate is definitely a nice option. Now on the bright side, if you do want to record a video in 60 frames per second, you can just use 1080p instead, but for those people out there who are shooting really high quality videos, then unfortunately with the 4K resolution, you are still limited to 30 frames per second. But those were my pros and cons for the Samsung Galaxy A33 5G. In general, I do think this is a really good phone that provides tons of value for the money, and as you could probably tell, my cons were really nitpicky, and with the exception of the headphone jack one, I feel like most of them aren't really going to affect a whole lot of people all that much. But all the same, if you do want to learn more about this phone and what you should know before you buy it, be sure to check out my full review and tips and tricks videos for it on the channel. But I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you found this information useful as well. If you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. But as always, I will see you in the next video.